Hello and a very warm welcome to World Panorama, the show that gives you a 360-degree view of major global events of the week. I'm Sana Khan. Before we move ahead, here's a look at the top stories this week. Government crackdown continues in Syria, even as UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon asks head of UN Relief Agency to visit Syria to assess the humanitarian situation. Diplomatic wrangling rages on between New Delhi and Rome. The Kerala High Court extends Italian Marines' custody by another week. Violence rears its ugly head in Iraq, scores killed and dozens injured in a wave of bombings targeting security forces. And in sports, Argentine striker Carlos Tevez apologizes to Manchester City management. Manager Mancini says Tevez can play a starring role. Those were the top stories this week. Our focus today are the fast-moving developments in Syria. As Syria is cracking down harder on the so-called armed groups, the international community is ratcheting up economic and diplomatic pressure on the country. Experts say the situation in Syria appears to be deteriorating and that an end to the crisis remains nowhere in sight. As the 11th-month-long unrest worsens, Syria appears to have entered a crucial phase. What's in store in the months ahead? Is Syria headed for a stalemate? We'll discuss this with a special guest I have with me in the studio, Dr. Awad, South Asia Bureau Chief of Al Arabia. Thanks so much, sir, for joining me today here. Before we move ahead, here's a look at a detailed report.
Warnings from Syrian activists of a humanitarian catastrophe in Homs grew more desperate on Thursday as government forces resumed shelling of an opposition stronghold where hundreds have died in a week-long.
I think the sickening thing is the complete merciless nature. They are hitting civilian buildings absolutely mercilessly and without caring, and the scale of it is just shocking.
Among those who were killed in the violence in Homs were veteran American war correspondent Marie Colvin, who had been working for the Sunday Times of London, and a young French photographer, Remy Orschlik. Their killing has sparked strong reactions.
The situation in Syria remains dramatic. I am deeply shocked by the news that 2 foreign journalists have been killed in Homs. I severely condemn the actions of the Syrian security forces.
Today, the only witnesses on the ground are foreign journalists. And the population is desperate to get the media to cover the reality on the ground. So there's no reason to shoot at journalists. It is therefore most probably people related to the regime who are trying to deter journalists from working in Homs.
The UN General Assembly demanded an immediate halt to Syria's brutal crackdown. Russia has asked the United Nations to request the Secretary General to send a representative to liaise with all sides in Syria on the safe passage of humanitarian convoys.
Actually, our initiative is aimed at providing safety to humanitarian cargo deliveries. We are actively working with Syria and countries around it so that the people don't suffer from the ongoing violence.
Meanwhile, the US says it may have to consider additional measures in Syria if a political solution does not work.
Our focus now is on trying to pressure the regime into a political solution and on aiding the people of Syria, both in presenting a viable political alternative and in a humanitarian way. And I've also said repeatedly, and I say it again today, that we don't think contributing to the further militarization of Syria is a good idea.
China, Russia and Iran oppose the resolution put forward by Arab states with Western support just days after Beijing and Moscow vetoed a similar resolution in the UN Security Council. European Union believes that the members of the UN Security Council should shoulder responsibility for ending rising violence in Syria, calling for Assad to step aside.
I just think what's happening in Syria is appalling, and I've been very clear on behalf of all 27 member states of the European Union that leadership does not involve the murder of your own people or anyone else. It involves working with your people and finding solutions. And we've been very clear, therefore, that President Assad should stand aside.
Given the dramatic humanitarian situation in Syria, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has decided to dispatch Emergency Relief Coordinator Valerie Amos to the war-torn Arab country to assess the ground situation.
All right. Right, let me get in Dr. Awad at this point in time. Dr. Awad, my first question to you is there's so much happening around Syria. The situation is worsening by the day. Tell us what really is the ground situation. You keep reading all these reports every day, but that perhaps is just one side of the story.
Exactly, you've said it, and my sympathy goes to the family of the loss of my colleagues in Syria, and I deeply sympathize with them as much as I sympathize with my own peoples of brothers and sisters who are losing their life daily on Syria. It's a very painful morning to get up and see all the death in the street of Syria, which indicates that the Syrian situation is not an indigenous unrest as it has started. It has been hijacked by rebels, by external forces, by mercenaries who are in the ground that they have been inside. Now, coming back to the West and one side report, yes, we know that all these journalists were in homes and they were entered the country illegally, where the government had nothing to do with it. But nevertheless, if they wanted to bring the real picture of what's happening in Syria, if that is the case, then we should also give the other side of the story of the government, where it says that there are more than 5,000 security personnel and army officers have lost their life, including the double number in the civilian side. If that is the case, that means it's an open war, and it is the legitimacy of any government in the world to take its own control to restore law and order. It is the popular demand that the government is facing now in Syria, calling on the government to restore law and order. It's become a kind of an anarchy in many parts of Syria. So those pockets where the rebellion have taken the dominant part, the Syrian government, the whole world understood that these people have already taken the stage. But when the government take on them, it's a humanitarian issue. Why then aren't you trying to seize the violence from both the sides and let the people sit down across the table and discuss for a dialogue?
Right. Let me just pick up from where you left. Now, the whole world is in fact trying to take note of the situation and trying to come to a resolution. The UN has been keeping up their own efforts, while you know what's been happening with Russia and China. Where do you think the entire situation is headed? We're also learning of this new resolution that has been worked upon, taking Russia into confidence. What now?
The problem with the UN is being hijacked by the West and the United States. It's nothing to do with a real resolution to solve the Syrian crisis. If you wanted to solve the crisis, you have to indulge the government in solving the crisis. You cannot jump to any conclusion and come with a new resolution without taking the government in confidence. The government still have the support of the majority of the people. We have a president who have the most popular president till date. Two of the major cities in Syria, Aleppo and Damascus, is still supporting him strongly, which means 55% of the population, irrespective of the other sectors of Syria and other cities and provinces, still supporting him. And the army is behind him. If you have the majority behind the government, why are you siding with the minorities?
Right.
Nevertheless, the minorities have the right, the government have the right, but we need to sit down across the table. If you wanted to come up with a resolution, you must come with the government involved in it. If you just come and step and regime change, it's nothing. The UN has been the tools used by its superpower to gain what they want on the ground. Who cares about democracy or human rights in the world? Are these really the issues they are? And let us not fool ourselves. We know what the American interest in the region. We know what is the disintegration of the Arab world. We have seen what happened in Iraq. We have seen what happened in Libya. We are seeing what's happening in the Arab Spring and across the North African states of Arab country. It's all happening. It's nothing to do. It's an anarchy in the region.
So one thing is clear, Dr. Awad, that the president of Syria is not going anywhere. He has massive support behind him. But then again, what now? What's going to happen in Syria? A lot of developments are taking place. What do you see in the coming few months? Will the situation
I think the
change?
Russians have preempted what happened in our the council, what's so-called the Friend of Syria meeting in Tunisia. It already preempted the stage, because if you notice what is the real discussion on that ground was based only on changing of regime, calling on a humanitarian corridors and calling for foreign intervention. That was the case. So Russia have issued a statement within the United Nations Security Council and with Mr. Ban Ki-moon to send a representative to Syria to show that the reality on the ground. What we need at this stage is a ceasefire. A ceasefire is a must. There should be no firing from both the sides. American and the West should understand that don't maintain the rebels, arming the rebels. Because if you remember, Syrian government has come up with 5 amnesty law calling upon the rebels, lay down your arm and come for a general amnesty. United States have taken the lead 4 months back. Their spokespersons and their permanent representative have already said it on television and told the people of the rebel, do not lay down your arm, do not believe the government. That means you are accepting that the bloodshed in Syria continue to bleed because of the foreign interest. It's not because the people of Syria really want the bloodshed. We do not want the experience of Iraq or Libya to be repeated in Syria.
Absolutely. Dr. Awad, it's been a pleasure having you on this show. So one thing is clear. Syria holds a very, very crucial position in the Middle East, and the US, Britain and France must tread very, very cautiously on what they do next. Dr. Awad, thanks so much once again for joining me here on this discussion. We head in for a short break, but on the other side, we'll tell you why, even as the Greece bailout is a big reprieve, but long-term doubts still persist. Stay tuned. Welcome back to World Panorama. India and Italy failed to resolve the row over the killing of 2 Indian fishermen this week. Rome continues to insist that the deaths took place in international waters, while New Delhi says the 2 arrested Italian Marines will have to face Indian law. Here's the latest.
As the diplomatic row over the killing of 2 Indian fishermen by Italian naval guards escalates, Italian Deputy Foreign Minister Staffan de Mistura reached New Delhi on Wednesday. After meeting Minister of State for External Affairs Preneet Kaur, he stressed upon the need to find an early resolution of the issue.
I came because we wanted to continue the dialogue, the relations between a great country, India, and my own country, Italy, are very important for all of us and are excellent. That's why this tragic incident needed to be analyzed properly.
Mistura, however, reiterated that both nations need to resolve the issue amicably.
We are aware that this is a serious issue. We are taking it seriously, and the dialogue today was constructive.
Italy continues to say the incident took place in international waters, and so the Marines cannot be tried in Indian courts, a contention that has been contested by New Delhi strongly.
As far as the law point is going, they have their interpretation, we have our interpretation. As of today, the 2 people are on Indian soil, and tomorrow the Indian court is going to decide what steps are going to take further. So, as far as we are concerned in India, yes, we certainly will go by our law.
Meanwhile, an undeterred Italian government and the accused moved the Kerala High Court seeking quashing of the FIR that charges the Marines with the murder of 2 fishermen from Kerala. The row has escalated just ahead of Italian Foreign Minister Giulio Terzi's scheduled visit to India on February 28th.
A short-term solution for Greece's debt problem has been worked out by Eurozone finance ministers after a 13-hour marathon meeting that ended Tuesday. The second bailout for Greece will avert imminent bankruptcy and allow it to stay in the Eurozone. The €130 billion bailout plan would certainly resolve its immediate financing needs, but seems unlikely to revive the nation's shattered economy in the long run.
The Eurozone finance minister struck a deal early on Tuesday for a second bailout program for Greece that includes new financing of €130 billion and aims to cut Greece's debt to 121% of the GDP by 2020.
The outcome of today's deliberations was a very positive one. We worked, first of all, very hard in order to adopt a new economic program that was agreed with the Troika and that was formally approved today.
The new bailout will certainly ease pressure on Eurozone officials, not to mention an embattled Greek government. The new financial package will give some hope to the country that has been tottering on the edge of financial collapse for close to a year.
After a meeting of at least, I think, 13 or 14 hours, we have reached a far-reaching agreement on Greece's new program and private sector involvement that will lead to a very significant debt reduction for Greece.
European markets, however, edged lower following the news of a fresh bailout, having seen solid gains in the run-up to the meeting on expectations that a deal would be struck. Europe watchers are still questioning, however, the likelihood of Greece successfully paying off a largely reduced debt burden. A return to economic growth will take time, as most economists agree that a second bailout will only delay the inevitable. A prospect that has brought thousands of Greeks onto the streets to protest on Sunday. The cuts are expected to deepen a 5-year recession, adding to the Greek government's burgeoning financial burden.
I think this is Greece's last chance because it is obvious, I think, from all these past few weeks and the negotiations we have seen taking place in Europe, that the patience of our European partners has been spent. I don't think people are going to lend us any more money. The great bets, the big bets in the end is whether Greece will be able to deliver on the implementation part, because this is just the beginning, of a long process.
Even if the deal helps Greece avoid a messy debt repayment default on the 20th of March, Lucas Papademos will still have an arduous task of whipping a crumbling Greek economy into shape.
Positive in spirit, hundreds of voters flowed into Yemeni capital Sana's Old Town section on Tuesday to cast their votes to replace longtime ruler Ali Abdullah Saleh. The poll comes after a year of violent anti-government protests in the Arabian Peninsula's poorest country and will make Saleh the fourth Arab autocrat to leave office in a year after revolts in Tunisia, Egypt and Libya. Yemenis voted for change on Tuesday. Yemenis hope the election to replace President Ali Abdullah Saleh will give the country a chance to rebuild. Yemen has been ravaged by a year-long struggle that pushed it to the brink of civil war.
We have voted for President Abu Rabbu Mansour Hadi to build the modern Yemen through national dialogue, equality, freedom, dignity and justice. That is what the Yemeni citizens need.
We vote now in order to build the new Yemen, which is the demand of all Yemeni people. We want justice and equality to build a new modern state.
Although Vice President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi stands uncontested as a consensus candidate, the election is being seen as an attempt to help Yemen turn a new page.
We come to this polling station and on this day we close a chapter and open a clean white page in which to write the future of the new Yemen.
Elsewhere in the capital, large queues formed early in the morning outside polling stations amid tight security after an explosion ripped through a voting center in the southern port city of Aden on Monday. A high turnout is crucial to give Hadi the legitimacy he needs to institute changes outlined in a power transfer deal brokered by Yemen's Gulf neighbors. These include drafting a new constitution and restructuring the armed forces, in which Saleh's relatives hold key positions. New leader for Yemen, new hope for the Yemenis. With that, a short break. After that, brace yourself for the latest buzz from the 84th Academy Awards. Welcome back. Let's now take a look at some of the other developments across the globe in our next report.
At least 49 people, including a child, were killed and 600 injured on Wednesday in a railway accident in Buenos Aires, Argentina. An 8-car train station entered the Once station, one of the busiest in the capital, at a speed of 26 kilometers per hour and slammed into the buffers. The train was carrying between 800 to 1,000 commuters, the majority of them headed to work in the capital. The accident may have been caused by brake failure, but investigators are waiting to take a statement from the train operator, who was injured in the crash. Violent anti-American demonstrations over the burning of a Quran at a US base have spread across Afghanistan. At least 2 people have been killed and several others injured. Crowds pelted stones and set the US flag on fire. President Hamid Karzai met tribal leaders and politicians in an effort to find ways to calm tensions. Meanwhile, the Taliban has called on Afghans to kill and beat all Westerners in revenge for insulting the Quran. At least 48 people have been killed and dozens injured in a wave of bombings and shootings across Iraq. The violence targeted predominantly Shia areas, in particular police officers and checkpoints. In Baghdad, 9 people died in 2 successive blasts in the central Karara district. Outside the capital, at least 2 were killed in Bakuba. No group has claimed responsibility. Iraq has seen a wave of attacks since US troops withdrew in December. 2-minute silence was observed across the country at 12:51 p.m., the moment the magnitude 6.3 quake struck on February 22, 2011. In Christchurch, more than 20,000 people filled the tree-lined Hagley Park for the National Service of Remembrance.
With that, it's now time to gear up for some sports action in our next segment.
Michael Schumacher looked forward to being a contender again as his Mercedes team belatedly pulled the wraps off their shiny new Formula One car before testing at Barcelona's Circuit de Catalunya on Tuesday. The F1 W03 was far from attractive, with the by now familiar step nose seen on all the other 2012 cars, with the sole exception of McLaren. Schumacher declared it a beautiful moment. Australian cricketing master Ricky Ponting told a packed news conference that his one-day international career is over, but that he wants to fight to retain his test team place. The Tasmanian was dropped from the Australian team because of poor form, with selectors strongly indicating that his career in one-day internationals was all but over. However, the former national captain said he wanted to continue playing test matches. The 37-year-old is the second most prolific batsman of all time in limited overs internationals, scoring 13,000 runs in 375 matches since his debut in 1995. Manchester City finally got the apology they had been waiting for, when striker Carlos Tevez apologized for his behavior over recent months, setting up a possible return to action at the Premier League club. The Argentine striker also withdrew his appeal against a gross misconduct charge handed to him. City manager Roberto Mancini had previously suggested the striker could play again if he simply apologized. The return to Manchester and the apology are a start to the major bridge building Tevez needed to do before any possible appearance in a sky blue shirt.
What's the latest in showbiz and lifestyle? Here's a quick look. With the Oscars round the corner, speculations are running wild about this year's owners. Favorite for top prize of Best Picture is the silent black and white film The Artist and Martin Scorsese's fantasy flick Hugo. The Artist is nominated for 10 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actress and Best Director. George Clooney is among the favorites in the running for Best Actor for his role in The Descendants, but recently the scales have tipped in favor of French actor Jean Dujardin, who plays a down-on-his-luck silent film star whose career slips away with the advent of the talkies in The Artist. Cinephiles have to wait until February 26, though, to find out who the winners will be at the 84th Annual Academy Awards. Paul Rudd and Jennifer Aniston star in Wanderlust, a raucous comedy from director David Wayne about a couple who leaves the pressures of the big city and joins a freewheeling community where the only rule is to be yourself. Earlier, Aniston joined her co-stars at the red carpet premiere of the movie in Los Angeles. Aniston met her current boyfriend Justin Theroux on the sets of the film. Wanderlust opens in theatres on the 24th of February. The countryside met the city and also the rain at Burberry's London Fashion Week show. Tweed and cord were key and bags had a distinctively country living look. The classic Burberry Mac was given a twist with belted bows at the front. As loud crack and thunder rang out, models walked down the catwalk with umbrellas and simulated rain ran down the sides of the glass tent. That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. As I sign off, I leave you with these exciting visuals from Brazil, where thousands of revelers crowd the streets of Rio de Janeiro's historic Santa Teresa district with carnival in full swing on its final day.